Hello, I'm Claire Snowden-Darling,
I'm Laura Knowles.
and we are here with our structural expert from Balance Wellness, Tracy Cleeve.
Hi there, I'm Tracy. Lovely to see you all.
So we are going to talk to you today about a really interesting connection with the immune system, which is really often overlooked, actually, which is the connection between structural issues in the body and immune. So obviously at the moment with COVID-19, there's a huge amount of information going on about the immune system and all that kind of stuff. And we've been talking about supplementation and food and mind state and food intolerances and all these kind of things. But the way that we work as practitioners is we work with what we call the four realms, which is biochemical, emotional, electrical, because that's how our body works, and structural. So it would be very remiss of us to not talk about structure, because we've talked about the emotions, we talk about the electrical because we talk quite a lot about hydration, which is one of the main areas of electrical. There are others. And we also talk a lot about biochemicals. So today we're going to cover off structural imbalances and how they can either help or hinder the immune system. So we've all got a little nugget for you. Who wants to go first?
Oh, I will. I'll nugget first.
Always nuggeting.
I love a nugget. I wanted to start by talking through the Dura, which is a big structural, the dural torque is a structural technique that we have in the clinic and also that we teach in functional kinesiology. And the Dura is a tough inelastic tissue that runs up into the through the spine and up into the skull.
It's part of the meninges, isn't it? It's one of the layers of the meninges. I love that.
Meninges. That's a bit rude. And what happens in stress or when there's an immune response is that this dura can shorten or twist. And what I've found with clients is that they can usually tell when it's twisted because they either get a bit of a headache or they can feel it in their necks because it connects into cervical 3, which is another technique that we have to put that to correct the cervical 3. So you can get neck ache with this. And so you would need to come into the clinic to have the dural torque technique done. But a big thing that triggers this immune response is food intolerances. And so if you are someone who is aware that maybe you're a bit sensitive to foods, notice that if you do eat one of those foods like wheat or milk or sugar, if you suddenly go, oh, I feel a bit twisted, and my neck hurts and I've got a bit of a headache, and that can be classic dural torque. So my recommendation is don't eat the stuff and come into our clinics to get that correction when we're out of lockdown.
Yeah, lovely, because the Dura is a really fascinating one, isn't it? It's quite a primal response. It's quite an old part of human response mechanism, and it actually, the purpose of it twisting is to make us go into that fetal position when we have hurt ourselves, when danger is coming. It's to make us curl up into a ball a little bit like a woodlouse, so that we're kind of protected. So it's really interesting, and then this twist. But because we're so adept, really, as humans, at overriding those very subtle signals in our body that other animals aren't so adept at overriding, we just walk around with them. So yeah, we kind of, I know when my Dura's off because I'm just like, God, my neck just feels a little bit clunky. I'm not quite straight. And like you say, like the fog and the low level pain. And it's actually the Dura that craniosacral therapists work with too, isn't it? The connection. This is where that connection between the cranium and the sacrum comes from. So it's a fascinating response. But yeah,
it's one of my favourites to work with the immune system. It can, because if that Dura is twisted, then the body is constantly in stress. So then you're starting to find that there's food intolerance to lots and lots of things. And there's anxiety because the body is trying to deal with stress. So if you can get that body back into alignment, the body can go, oh, thank God.
Now, I don't know. Go on.
So I use that a lot in the clinic as well. If people are out of line or twisted, or there's still a little bit more pain going on in their back or their neck. Always, it's a little go-to is to go to DuraTalk to check
really
it out.
And it's also really good. We use it in our allergy protocol because it's a really good way of actually getting the body to desensitize to things. So I've got a little caveat with this, because there are things, and we do talk about this quite a lot, that we don't necessarily want to desensitize people to. So wheat, for example, what we would like to do is get your body to the point where it can buffer a bit of exposure, but we never recommend that people eat things that they are very, very intolerant to anyway, because it's just your body doesn't love it. So it doesn't matter what you do to stop any kind of reactions, it's still not, for full wellness, a good idea to eat those things. What we're looking at doing is this buffering, bringing back your body's ability to buffer. But working on your dura can really minimize those big reactions, can't it? Like, you know, the people who are bent over crippled with irritable bowel syndrome or a massive migraine as soon as they eat something, having this dura work actually gets the body out of a stress response, which in itself helps the immune system, reduces adrenaline and cortisol, etc., etc. It's just come to me, you know, because we're so good at saying, oh yeah, we need to work on this in clinic, and we do, because this is actually a traditional technique, a chiropractic technique that we actually use with blocks and those kind of things. But it's just occurred to me that in lockdown, there's that lovely twist, isn't there? That if you, and don't do this if you have any kind of, back issues or spinal issues, but there's that lovely twist where you can lie on your back, bend your knee, twist your body over one way, and actually let your knee drop over and your arms go the other way. And I'm just thinking, doing that both ways might just be a little bit of a lockdown. If you're experiencing this kind of achiness, the fog, those kind of things, you suspect you're intolerant to something, doing those little twists morning and night might actually just be a really good little remedy for now.
Yeah, it's like a yoga de-stressor at the end of a yoga set, isn't it? It's a good idea. That might be great homework.
Yeah, we often find that there's some postures in yoga that actually really support what we teach in kinesiology, which is interesting.
What I'd say with that one is get into the position where you can actually feel your body relaxing into it, because you'll probably find one side is a little bit more uncomfortable and one side is and stay in that side that feels like that's the parasympathetic nervous system kicking in.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And so the immune response there is because we're eating foods we're intolerant to. The immune issue is because we're eating foods we're intolerant to, and every single time we eat that food, it's a little bit like eating a small bit of arsenic. So our immune system is now having to deal with a food it's intolerant to, as opposed to being all ready to go fight big viruses and bacterial infections, right? That's the real issue with food intolerances. Yeah. Lovely nugget, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I've got another one for later.
And C3, Dura Mater and C3. Thank you, Laura. Tracy, do you want to go next?
Hi there. Yes. Well, obviously, I'm fascinated by structure, and by being fascinated by structure, I have to be fascinated by the lymph in the body, because we have lymph nodes which contain lymphocytes, which are in the lymphatic system that directly lead to our immune system. So it's really important. And the interesting thing is that, lymph doesn't work like the circulatory system, which pumps blood around the body. Okay, it does actually pump slightly, like between 1 and 30 beats per minute, if we're lucky. And so to actually be able to help that is that we need to actually move. We're not built to be sedentary, we're built to be active. So, choose your exercise, whether it's walking, running, cycling, yoga, Pilates, all these things. I really can't talk enough about Captain Tom, and him at 100 years old, moving around, walking around his garden and getting his lymphatic system moving. He's helping his immune system and helping himself through this time of lockdown that we're going through. And if we've got a lymph issue, we've got chronic pain, okay, and there's a little knock-on effect with that, because it also affects our vagus nerve system. And our vagus nerve, 80% of that goes up into the brain. Okay, and 20% is then distributed out to the organs, and it's responsible for us to be able to relax. you know, a lot of that comes from the gut. And I know that Claire and Laura are going to be talking about that shortly, you know, but if things aren't working in our body, you know, it all starts in the gut. And we've got a lot of lymph in the gut that, you know, is responsible for a lot of our healing. So, but I've got a couple of things that clinic called retrograde lymphatics protocol, which is really, really good to help get our lymph flowing, and it's something that you can easily do yourself. And I'm going to just demonstrate for you. So if we find sort of like the middle of our chest here, okay, which is where the sternum is, and what we're going to do is actually going to massage sort of from the sternum, almost coming up to the armpit through here, but using the heel of our hand, and with a little bit of wax, or if you've got some oil. If you haven't got any of those, you can use moisturizer, anything that can just give a little bit of easy movement onto the skin. So we don't want to be burning the skin when we're sort of like moving across. And the way I like to do this when I'm doing that sort of like a self-treatment is literally to hold them and hold your elbow with the other hand to give it support, because you can guide the elbow as the actual part to massage, rather than you trying to do this, which is a lot more difficult to do. If we support our elbow and take the elbow across, it actually does the massage for us, and we can do that both ways. And what's actually a fantastic little tip for this, I was on holiday a year ago, and I remember messaging Claire actually when I was on holiday, going, oh my god, my ankles are swollen, what am I going to do? She goes, oh, do retrograde lymphatics. I was like, oh, so put my feet up against the wall, laying on the bed, and I did this thing. I kid you not, literally within minutes those ankle swellings had gone down and they didn't feel so stiff and tight. So it's fantastic. So, you know, when we get blockages in the lymph system and it's not moving properly, you know, it's another way to really, really help us. And the other thing is that neck pain too, you know, when we can't turn our head round and see around the back, using our bodies to get around there. You know, this is really kind of our levator scapula that's kind of responsible for that. And the vagus nerve runs right through there. And right, if we reach over the top and we grab hold of the spine of our scapula, we lift our shoulder up, we can feel into a point. We'll find a point that's a little bit ouchy. And if you just hold on to that, and then what you can do is just hold it like that. You can move your arm, and you can really find that spot, and even sort of move your head gently as well. And you can do that on both sides. Find the really ouchy bit. Just going to slowly, you can really feel it, can't you? Because, you know, it's not as good as having somebody rub in there yourself, but actually it's not too bad. It's actually quite good. And then moving your neck. And actually that does help relax the vagus nerve, and it also helps relax the neck a little bit more and gives a little bit more movement around there. So there's a kind of two little tips that can really help us to help with our lymph flow.
Yeah, thank you, Tracy. And that's really interesting as well, because that ties in with Laura's, because of course that can have, our lymph can become stagnant if we're eating foods we're intolerant to. Not only is our dura going to go out, our lymph is going to become stagnant, and this is how everything starts to get congested, and we need to keep it all moving.
Yeah, lymph is a huge part of healing. And what I discovered, because I was really fascinated, especially sort of coming on here today to talk to you, is having a little bit more investigation into lymph. And actually it says that the abdominal lymphatics are responsible for quite a huge part of our healing process, especially because that's where our immune system begins.
Yeah, so interesting, beautifully segued into my little slot. But the other thing I wanted to say about lymph was, you were talking about good exercise. And I know that in kinesiology for years, we have been ringing the bell of rebounders, you know, the little mini trampolines. And because they exert a certain amount of pressure, which actually gets your lymph moving. So they were designed by NASA to rebuild bone density after astronauts have been in space, when they've got no bone density left. But the side effect, so not only is it about bone density, so brilliant menopausal women out there or people with bone density issues, but not only is it cardio, it's also for bone density, but also the G-force that it exerts specifically gets your lymph moving. So particularly if you're also doing things like the retrograde lymphatics and also moving your body on something like rebounder, as well as the other movements, especially if you find movement hard or you find cardio too hard, just even sort of 1 or 2 minutes on something like a rebounder, and you don't even have to bounce hard, you can just literally sort of move up and down on that G-force. But the tip I've got there is it needs to have 46 springs, so it should tell you how many springs. That exerts the right amount of G-force pressure for your lymph, which is very different to an actual trampoline, which is much softer. There you go.
Lovely.
Nerding out about trampolines.
Oh, I love that. Oh, there's another thing as well. I read that we're helping sort of with that is taking probiotics. It helps with over a year. It actually helps with the strength of the bones. So yeah, there's a really interesting article. I'll have to send it to you to have a look at. It's really good.
I'd like to see that. So talking about guts, let's move on to my little nugget. And my little nugget is around the ileocecal valve and its connection to stress and why when it's off, it upsets the immune system. So the ileocecal valve is literally a valve, a sphincter valve, so like a cat's bum, between the small intestine and the large intestine. Small intestine comes up, meets the ileocecal valve, and then just after the ileocecal valve is the appendix. Now what's supposed to happen is all your mushed up food from your small intestine comes up to this cat's bum hole, and the cat's bum hole opens and the mushed up food goes through and is squirted by the appendix with a whole load of amylase. Now the amylase is basically like a probiotic. It cleans what's come out of the small intestine, so it's like antiseptic, antibacterial, and it provides slip, because now that mushed up food has basically got to do this very big job and go against gravity and go up the ascending colon. So the appendix provides slip and also this antibacterial action. So that's how the ileocecal valve works. Now, what happens with the ileocecal valve is it can either get stuck shut or it gets stuck open. And the problem that's going to be the image that freezes for the beginning of this video, isn't it? Always you and I pulling funny faces, Laura. And the problem with that is we either get sort of waste from the large intestine leaking back into the small intestine, which is where we reabsorb. So we're literally reabsorbing our own poo. Or we can't get the food through to the large intestine and it all backs up and starts to ferment. So this is the site of a lot of irritable bowel syndrome and a lot of issues. Now, there are many reasons why an ileocecal valve will sort of have a disorder to it. However, something that is massively overlooked. So that in itself is a structural issue, because the ileocecal valve is a structure within our body. However, there's a bigger structural issue at play here, particularly when we're stressed, because I'm going to stand up to demonstrate this. Our small intestine, this ileocecal valve actually lives, if you were to put a finger in your belly button and a finger on your hip bone, it's halfway between the 2 points on the right hand side. Now, what's really interesting, when we're stressed, in kinesiology world, there's a massive muscle in the thigh called the sartorius that's connected to our adrenals. So when we're stressed, the sartorius, and there's another one called the gracilis, basically are impacted. So you know that feeling where, you know, you maybe get a phone call, it's really bad news, and you feel all the blood drain out of your legs and like you're going to fall over. That's the sartorius and the gracilis suddenly sort of switching off because of this huge shock. Now, what happens is when we have low-level stress, it's not quite that obvious, but basically, over time, these muscles just stop firing properly. And what happens, they're really big supporting muscles. So because they're not working, they kind of shorten and tighten slightly or just stop doing anything. So let's just pretend that my shoulders are my pelvis for a moment. They stop doing their job, which means that we kind of get a bit of a pelvic dip. And so one leg becomes shorter than the other. Now, what the body has to do to compensate that so we don't fall over is it has to rotate the pelvis backwards and down, or front and down. And what's really interesting is if you've now got this, you know, that's where your legs are, your hips and legs. If you've now got a pelvis that's kind of out of balance, that's just going to place so much pressure on these underlying structures in our abdomen, which means that this ileocecal valve is either going to get stuck shut or open. And now what happens is, if you think about exactly what Tracy was saying, what Laura was saying about digestion, how predominantly, you know, 80% or so, differing numbers of our immune system starts in the gut microbiome. If we've got fecal waste leaking back into the small intestine, if we've got fermented food sitting there kind of rotting, how good do we think that is for our gut microbiome and our immune system? It's not at all. So we need to keep our ileocecal valve functioning properly. We need to keep our pelvis nicely aligned. So even those stretches we were talking about earlier are important. Things like the C3 are really important. All the things we'll be talking to you about are really important to make sure that the underlying structures are beautiful and working as they should. So there are things that we can do. We do corrections in clinic. But one of my take-home nugget for you is don't eat food that you're intolerant to, because that will definitely cause not only sartorius imbalance, but also gut ileocecal valve imbalance. But a really big one for ileocecal food, and this is a bit of a wow for a lot of people, is not eating raw food, especially if you're under stress. Because if the ileocecal valve is under pressure, it just cannot process raw food at all. It's wet, it's soggy, it doesn't pull the nutrients out. We just need to give it as much of a helping hand as possible. So even in summer, like, Laura and I we've written quite a few blogs on this, that we just don't really eat salad very often. Our bowels can't tolerate it. We're lifelong irritable bowel syndrome sufferers. We just can't process it. So even when it's warm, soups, stews, you think about the really hot countries like India, they're eating curries. In Morocco, they're eating tagines. We need those soups and those stews for really good bowel function, which will really boost our immune system.
Raw food is so difficult to process, isn't it? And if you lightly cook it, then you start to break it down so that when it enters the body, it's so much easier to process.
That's it, exactly. It's easy.
Big take home. Don't eat salads.
Don't eat salads. Don't eat food you're intolerant to, and get your legs up against the wall and rub your chest. That's our take.
In summary.
Yeah, but that is how we boost our immune system. Some of the ways of keeping our structure nicely balanced so that our immune is also really functioning beautifully.
Gorgeous.
Lovely. Well, Tracy, thank you very much for your wisdom and knowledge.
We should do this again.
I had a blast. Thank you. I've had a really good time.
Yeah, it's been great. So for more information, check out our pages. We have the College of Functional Kinesiology, where we talk about all of this stuff that we teach. We have Balanced Wellness, where we talk about our individual passions and what we do in clinic. And yeah, have a good lockdown. Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye.